Okay, good. Okay, good. So, good, there's several people who have not heard the story before. So, I'll say, in 2016, while rifling through my mother's archives, in the basement of my house that had all come from Mississippi, I found this beautiful portrait of my grandmother, and her name is Pauline Wiggins, and it was done by a man named Albert Lee. And so through my research, with all the documents that were in these archives, I found out that Albert Lee was an inmate at Parchman Farm, which is the name for the Mississippi State Penitentiary, and that my grandmother had worked right alongside my grandfather from 1944 to 1956 at the penitentiary, which was a kind of a tumultuous time in history if you think about the end of the Second World War, civil rights, etc. And so what I found out was that Beanie is what I called her, so I'll call her Beanie from now on. She had started a hobby show, and that's what she called it, Pauline's Hobby Show. And what she did was, so back then, like right now in prison systems, we have a lot of rehabilitation. It's kind of a buzzword. You're always trying to rehabilitate these people before they get back in society. As she said, 95% of people do, but back then that was not the case. And so it was a big push in the Mississippi legislature, and it took years from when my grandfather came into office for them to push that through the legislature and make it a law that they would allow rehabilitative programs in the penitentiary. And it was also a PR move, frankly, for prisons around the country, but especially in Mississippi. And so this was Beanie's idea. And she was a big supporter of her husband. She was 14 years younger than him, so she had a lot of energy, and she herself was very creative. And so her first show started with 12 pieces, and she would advertise in the magazine that my grandfather started at Parchman called Inside World. And you'll see that Albert Lee actually drew in this particular one. There's like pictures that he drew, and they did this off a mimeograph in the laundry camp. So they called them camps because it was 16,000 acre plantation prison farm. It had been somebody's farm that had been deeded to the state to turn into penitentiary. So they farmed cotton there. That was the primary income source. So anyway, so when they started the contest, my grandmother said, you have to just use what you find because you didn't go to Michael's or anything like that. And so you just use whatever you found on the penitentiary to do your art. So she started out with 12 pieces. And so she also liked contests, which is pretty smart of her because it's motivating, right? And so she created her hobby show to be a contest in addition to just an exhibit. And so they knew that they were vying for prize money, although everybody got a little something to be in the show. But if they won a prize, they got more money. And because it became so successful, her show, it became twice a year. She had judges from the Mississippi Delta community who came twice a year and judged for her. She had, and there was also a sale, just like ours, a sale. And so my grandfather opened a prison bank because these men and women, it was men and women at this prison, by the way, they were making money off of their sale from the hobby show, so they needed somewhere to keep their money so they could use it for whatever they needed. And usually people only got money from their family, but back then, it's right after the war and there wasn't any money to have, so it meant a lot to them to be able to make some money back then. And so then the next thing, let's go to the next one. We're going to go to a little family history. We're going to digress from it. That was Beanie. So that was a photograph that Albert used to draw her, and that had been in a paper, several newspaper articles. Okay, let's go to the next one. So that was my grandfather, and he has some kind of funky tie. All right, go next. Okay, and then my mother is not here yet, so we're checking on her. This guy's named Cecil, and he was worked up at their house. So their house is this enormous 3-story mansion that they lived on. And so my grandmother ran the house, and she ran the kitchen, and so she taught everybody to cook. They came to work for her, and Cecil came to work for her. And my grandparents were out of town one night in Greenville for some reason, and my mother was 10 or 11, and she caught on fire because she had a little nightgown, and she backed up to the fireplace, and she caught on fire, and she screamed for her brother, and they screamed, and Cecil heard her screaming, and he came in, and he wrapped her up in a rug, and he saved her life. And she had third-degree burns on her legs, which are there today, and she's 87. And so I have his picture in here because if he hadn't saved her life, then I wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't have this whole thing. And there was also a lady inmate named Betty that lived in the house that you see here. When my mother came, she was the first female child to be in the house ever, and so my grandmother was constantly worried, and so she had Betty live in their house for the years that they were there. And so she sat with Mama during her rehabilitation of her burns because she was bedridden for a long time. So that is Cecil. So I kind of wanted to show him and give him a little credit. But so so my grandmother, I knew her, I was really close to her, and she was energetic. When I met her, they were not at Parchman, okay? But she was energetic, and she was generous, and she was kind. And one thing I always tell about her is she saw people. So when she had lived at Parchman, because of her position in the community, she could have played bridge and gone to lunch and just done what people want to do, like just frittered her time away because she would have been privileged in the Delta, because Parchman was huge and it was a prestigious thing. And my grandfather was very involved in the politics of Mississippi because of his position, so she could have played a different role. But she chose to see these people that she lived with and that worked for her and that worked on their land and provided their food. And she wanted to have a relationship with them as much as she could. And so when she started the hobby show, she believed that people needed an outlet, a creative outlet. And I have a few quotes from her, and I like it. She said that it puts minds and hands to work to reveal hidden talents and opens new avenues of creative activity. That was one of her quotes that she said, and she's right. And what I'm going to talk about in a minute are the similarities between Beanie's show and my show, but also the people then and the people now. It's not so dissimilar as you think. But so she also says everybody gets a small cash prize, but nobody enters just to get the prize. They like to be doing something, and this seems to give them the new outlet they've needed. So it was huge for them to have to be able to do something that wasn't in a field, in a canning plant, in a laundry room, what else did they do? They had a lot of animal husbandry. That was a big job, or in the kitchen. So, and it was a form of therapy, which it is still to this day, as you know. I mean, if you look around here, art is a form of therapy. So when I read about all this stuff, I was thinking about how, this is a dignifying outlet for people. And I kept thinking, what can I do with this? And so Andrea Shelton, who y'all heard us talk about, we have been friends since long ago when I moved here in 2000. We met at church. And I remember when she started Heartbound Ministries when her brother was incarcerated. And we kind of all went through his 18-month incarceration with her. And that's how she founded Heartbound Ministries. It was because her brother went to prison, and he told her that people got a bar of soap for a year and that they needed some hygiene items, and they needed to know God. And so she started by collecting. We would go on trips with our kids, like to soccer games or whatever we would go to. We would bring back soap and shampoo from Holiday Inn, and we would just give it to her. And then she would take it to the chaplain at the prison, and then they would say, the chaplain has extra soap and shampoo for you. And so they could go and get counseling from the chaplain, and they could get hygiene items, which we all take for granted. We probably have too many at our house. And then they could go back and they could have a bar of soap that would last them, longer than 2 months. I mean, it was kind of an ingenious way for her to start this. And it was a practical need, because at the end of the day, that's what they needed, and they needed encouragement. So that's kind of how she started. So when I found out all this stuff about my grandmother and about her hobby show, I contacted Andrea because she's the only person in prison ministry, and I emailed her because I was too scared to call because I thought she's going to think I'm so weird. And I just said, okay, I've got this idea. You know, my grandmother did this. What do you think? And she was like, yes, we're going to do it. And so we met, and we went to the commissioner's office, the Department of Corrections, and met with Homer. And when we walked into Homer's office, I was surrounded by inmate art, and I was kind of like, okay, I'm in the right place. And I kind of told him a little bit of the story I just told you, and he said, okay, that I want you to do it. We'll put a mandate out to the whole prison system in the state of Georgia, which is 52 prisons, and we'll just see what happens. And we'll have it all come in the central office, which is in Forsyth, Georgia, and then we will see, you know, what we get. But I do want you to have it during the legislative session, which is, you know, January, February, March. So we have it in February, always the week of Valentine's, which proved prudent because people would buy Valentine gifts from us. And we set up in the lobby of the Sloppy Floyd building, and we used the Atlanta Transitional Center, which is down on Ponce de Leon. It's a men's transition center. So when they qualify, they go to a transition center, and they can be there 2 years to 4 years, and they have to get a job in the community, and they have to prove themselves that they are worthy to get out of prison. And the ones at the Ponce de Leon facility, they also have the privilege of applying to be a worker at the governor's mansion, which is huge for them. And so the guys that work at the mansion live there. And so we got to be friends with their warden, and he would let the guys at the TC, they would bring a truck that's owned by Department of Corrections, and they would go to the private school that loaned us the boards to put up our art, and then they would come down and meet us on a Saturday morning, and we would set the art show up. So inmates helps us set the art show up, which was pretty cool because we got to meet them. Bob helped me, my husband helped me a lot. And we would get some volunteers, and then we would have those guys, and we would spend a few hours. Andrew would always bring in donuts, and then we'd bring in Chick-fil-A for lunch, which was huge for these guys. And we got to know some pretty interesting people. One of the men that came was named Fred Eason. And he, 1 year Governor Deal his wife had the theme of counties, okay, for her Christmas decorations at the mansion. And he did, he painted some of the courthouses. He was an artist. And so we got to meet him, and we formed a lasting friendship with him to this day. And he ended up teaching art for us at the Atlanta Transition Center. We got to have graduation ceremonies with him at the end of the sessions. And Ms. Deal started this. She had everybody have the day off from the governor's mansion. They wouldn't work, the guys that worked down there, and they could invite their families. And we would have Chick-fil-A for lunch, and she would come and speak. And then Ms. Kemp came and spoke to our last one, and then COVID hit. And then Fred got out of prison. So it ended well for right now, but it was a real blessing for us to meet Fred, and then for us to be able to pour back into him. But he gave back to us. And he gave back to us what he, with his talent. And that's one thing that Little Readers is what we do here. That's where all the sales, the proceeds from the sales go to a program called Little Readers. So that's where Little Readers, by the way, is named for a guy named Finn Little, who's a lawyer here. People always think it's Little Readers because it's little children, but it's actually from a guy here who gave Andrew the money to start the program. And so what it does is we film the inmate reading to his or her child, and then we burn the DVD of them reading. We send the book and the DVD to the kid, and it establishes a rapport for that child with their parent, because you would think that, oh, you haven't seen somebody in a while and there's so much to talk to, and you go visit your parent in prison, you can tell them all these things. No, it's a very awkward situation. So this allows them, if they can go to see their parent, they have something to talk about and some way to connect with them. And a lot of these kids don't ever see their parents much, and so it's a way for them to over and over see them. So that's kind of where our proceeds go from this. Okay, so these were Beanie's judges. So I think these are great. So this is my grandmother, that's my grandfather, and these are judges from our community. And this was the second governor that my grandfather served under. So his name was Hugh White, and that was a portrait of him. And so they're holding a leather purse that they used to do leather work. There's a little chuck wagon or whatever you want to call that. There's dolls because they could sew. They had sewing, because they made all the uniforms for the prisoners there on the grounds, and so they would sew, and then you had the ship. Right, you go to the next one. So, well, I'll show you. So our judges, and this is her show. So our judges, we had our first year, we had people from, we had artists, we had former First Lady, Mrs. Barnes, we had Carl Sanders' daughter, we had a couple of representatives, we had a girl from the High Museum, we had a guy from SCAD. Anyway, I can't remember. Anyway, so we kind of had a mixture, private and public sector. We did our first year. This year was fun. We had everybody from Oglethorpe come and be judges. So that was kind of fun for us, a little bit of a change. And a lot of them, some of them get art and some of them don't, so it's kind of a toss-up. And when we would do the show downtown, because it was a bigger show, I would make up categories like nature, and I would make up categories like mechanical, and I would just make up silly categories so more people could win, because first, second, and third place win in each category. Here, because the show is so small, we just have first, second, and third for this show. And so Beanie had obviously categories, as you saw earlier, and she would have a winner from each category, and then she would give, her prize money out for that. So she kind of set it up really like, I feel like I had it set up downtown when we did it. And these doilies, were you really young? Those are a big deal back then. So people like to buy those. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so shoe polish, Jesus. This is Jesus done out of shoe polish. And that guy was done as shoe polish, which is incredible. And he won. Can you go call and check on them? And so I love that one because I think it's incredible. Like, how do you do that out of shoe polish? I don't know, but it's pretty incredible. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is a children's robe. So they got fabric donated from local people. There was a textile plant somewhere in the Delta that they got fabric donated from. And the lady that made this, she also made these things up here. So you can kind of see the same kind of fabric is used here that was used there. So this is my mother's last doll. And this quilt was made for her and all these clothes by a lady, and her name was Elaine Foreman. And she was an incredible seamstress. And she lived in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and she wanted to be an actress. And so a boyfriend told her that if she'd just help him out with something, he'd take her to Hollywood and she'd be a movie star. And so she helped him out robbing a bank. And so they got caught. And so they both went to prison. And so Elaine ended up staying in prison for a long time. And because a boyfriend told her she was going to go to Hollywood. And so that is who the person is that made all these things for my mom and made that. Let's go to our next one. I usually don't, I never ask anybody's crime, just by the way. I just happen to know these stories because my mother's told me. Okay, then that's made out of matchsticks. And they're still making things out of matchsticks. I didn't have 3D art at this show, but at our show, we still have things out of matchsticks. I called that whole section when I would get things like that Cracker Barrel, because then it reminds you of something you buy at Cracker Barrel at a gift shop. That'd be my Cracker Barrel.
Not covered.
Oh.
Not coming.
Okay, go ahead. Can you video this then on your phone, just the rest of it?
Oh.
It's also being taken.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay, we'll send it to her. Okay, and so then that ship model was something they'd done. And ships are a huge thing in prison art. And I found out the reason why they're a thing is because they mean escape. When you get on a ship, they mean escape, and you go away. And we have had incredible ships in our shows, and they always sell, every single one. I don't care how many we have sells. This one was probably done out of some kind of metal work. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, isn't that pretty? The little embroidered cape. And I love that one. All right, is that my last one? Yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about are the similarities a little bit. So my grandmother's initial theme was waste. So she wanted you to use what you found, obviously, that was wasteful on the property and make what you had. And so this purse right here that I'm going to pass around, I bought at our very first show, and it's incredible. And I'm going to read you first before we'll pass it around. But I'm going to read you what the gentleman wrote that made it. I'll start with you. It says, and we'll go back to this. 100% of the material from which this purse was made would otherwise occupy space in our local landfill. It was primarily made from potato chip and cookie bags. On average, each piece took approximately 3 minutes to cut out, fold, pattern, and sew together. I stopped counting at 7,000 pieces. Ingenuity and time can accomplish amazing things. A prime example, with no real needle, it took me almost 9 hours just to show the strap as it could be placed on the purse, and then to put it there. I would have liked to put a liner on the inside and a cell phone pouch with blending pattern on the outside, but time simply didn't permit. It's well made, so it should last a good while. Enjoy, M.R. Mosier, River Bend. So that is a cool thing, that he used waste. And one thing I've learned from these inmates is they will take M&M bags and they'll water them down, and they'll take the dye out of the colors from candy bags and use it to paint. So that's ingenuity. That is using waste. And they also, one thing my grandmother did is she would send, if somebody made something and they wanted to send to a family member, she would do her best to make sure that it got sent to that family member. And that too is a thing that I've seen with our inmates. Not necessarily that it would be a piece, but might be prize money. So this is a letter from this guy that was in Coffee Correctional, which is in Nichols, Georgia, which I don't even know where it is. But this guy's an incredible artist, and this prison is not his, but he does really good work. So one day, hopefully, you'll see it. You've seen it. It says, Dear Mrs. Lucy Fugate and Andrea Shelton, thank you for informing me recently, as well as reminding me of our success with the last art sales and exhibition for the Little Readers program. I thank God for this ministry on all that it is doing to provide adequate service and the support we need as incarcerated artists that are desiring to give a contribution to a movement. I can testify to its need. To be short and brief, I have a daughter who now attends UGA, furthering her education after graduating this year from Spelman College with Latin and departmental honors. She's now seeking her master's degree in sociology and anthropology. I myself have been incarcerated the majority of her life and do recall not having programs such as Little Readers. At and during visitation, we often spelled words from the back of the vending machine wrappers or anything we could get our hands on. For example, when she was 4 years old, I started out giving her 4- and 5-letter words. This continued throughout her next 3 and 4 years, and she became so motivated to make all A's at school for Antonio. Get it? The father's first name, who she visited often on weekends to remind her about the importance of education. I share this information to inform you all that upon my release, Lord's will, it shall be soon after this September 2018 parole reconsideration, I do desire to continue to be a part, to contribute to Heartbound Ministries and Little Readers program, etc. I've spoken at length with my daughter, Katima Sanders, who is currently doing motivational speaking at graduations in her hometown each year, Albany, Georgia, or wherever she is blessed to speak. She has a gift of art in words, and I am in agreement with her to stay in the visual art field. We will work as a team. So in closing, please know that my 3 entries should be on your way. It's not been easy at all at this Coffee Correctional facility. God has been with me, and the enemy has been busy trying to distract me as well as destroy my production of art through many of the staff. God be the glory for his grace. Be blessed. Antonia Moore. So back then, people wanted to take care of their family, and this man, he was trying to teach his daughter how to read. And he has been in, I looked him up just because I was going to talk tonight, and he's been in since 1998. He's not out now. He didn't make it out. But, and then we had another guy. We used to have a metalworking category. And so this is from his wife. There's a man that you'll hear about. So he'd made metalworking. He did a chainsaw helicopter the first year. A friend of mine bought actually and gave to her son. And he was so creative. He's so creative of what he would make. He worked in a machine shop down in Forsyth, and so he usually always sent us pieces for our art show. Lucy, it was a pleasure to meet you at Art from the Inside. Thank you for sharing your grandparents' story and your idea for this exhibit. It also gives the public an idea of the talent and skills these incarcerated persons possess. It gave my husband, James Andrews, Burris Correctional Training Center, encouragement and an opportunity to share his talent and skills. So we would meet a lot. We meet a lot of the family members that come to us through that. So my grandparents probably knew a lot of the families because they would come every weekend to visit. And that was one thing that my grandfather implemented at Parchman was more visitation. And so they could have visitation every weekend. The other thing that he started was 10-day Christmas suspension. And so this was the first one in the whole country, was that if the behavior was good, they could go home for 10 days of Christmas to spend Christmas with their family. And they, of course, they had to come back at 10 days, but I mean, still, that was huge, to get to go home and be with your family. So he and my grandmother were both progressive. And one thing that, prison is no great place anywhere you are. But one thing that I know that he did was he tried to make it a better place for them. As far as safety, I know he improved the quality of their food. So this book, Down on Parchman Farm, has been my main source of history about my grandfather because I never knew him. And so this is really interesting. It was written by a professor at the University of Southern Mississippi. And actually he contacted my mom after he wrote that book because he wanted to do something on my grandfather, and she didn't want to, but anyway, that's another story. That's for another story. But anyway, so the history of art and inmates goes obviously way, way back. And so this, hello, come on in. Hello. So this art exhibit that you see here is from Walker State Prison. So at Walker, their job, like your job is to be a professor, your job is to be in business or whatever, their job is to do art. And so they do art all day long. And we have gotten to know, I don't know all the artists that are represented over there, but I know most of them that are represented over there. And they, the warden came to an event here a few weeks ago and said that they put their heart and soul into it, and it's true. So whenever you see somebody, see what you see out there, they put a lot of thought, they put their soul into it. I have this old country saying that says what's down in the well comes out in the bucket, and I believe that with art, because what is in here is what comes out in your art piece. Because they're not trying to sell something, they're not trying to display anything anywhere. It's just really kind of what they feel here, and that's why we have their artist statements, because that tells you their memory or their feeling of when they did that painting. And they are they're huge encouragement to me because I've gotten to know them. And one in particular, his name is David Wesley, and I just pulled this out of our little bin. So the way the art program started at Walker was because an inmate named John was an artist, and he said, I want to start an art program here. And so he did. This was years and years and years ago. And he taught this guy, David Wesley, who's still in, how to paint. And he had never painted before John taught him how. So it's pretty incredible. This is in the bin right here, but he's got several pieces in art. Actually, his piece won first prize this year, which I know is a huge encouragement to him. He's very shy. And then this guy, Mark Hall, he has several in there. He's when Eli bought his Oglethorpe. He got to come Saturday and see the art show because he got released from prison during COVID. And so he wrote me a text and said, I got to come to the art show, and I'm so proud that I got to be a part of it. So it's a huge thing for these men to be able to be recognized. for something that they did that was good, and not just always to be remembered for something they did that was bad, as was Beanie's. That was part of her, mission, was that they would be known for something other than their past, which I think we all can actually relate to. And when the inmates for the state of Georgia participate in our art show, this is also something that they can put on their record to help them get out one day on their parole. It's altruistic for them because they're donating it to us, and they're donating to our Little Readers program. Just FYI, I think that's kind of interesting because people are always kind of like, what? And I'm like, no, they know that they're donating to Little Readers. And I've got this letter that I'm going to read here for a minute because it ties into, well, let me do this first. So there was a paper called the Christian Science Monitor, and they covered my grandmother, and it ties kind of back into our fabric. It says, "Dear Mrs. Wiggins, several days ago, the enclosed letter was published in the Christian Science Monitor. I was so touched by your work with these men that I immediately looked around to see what I had to do to offer up in the way of possible equipment. I do a good bit of sewing, and so my chief yield came from the material drawers of my workroom. I hope some of the odds and ends in the box will be of use to you. It's quite likely that you will hear from other readers of the Monitor. I wish I could fit up a whole hobby room for the men because I know how important it is to have one's hands busy at useful things. I'm grateful that they are finding even a small release for their energies. Most cordially, Gina Lee Sanders." And again, the similarity between what we have now, back then, and what we have now, it's the same. It's the same. Everybody wants to be recognized for something that they can do that doesn't just tie into their crime and to their past. And so I think that's so important also in their, and when they do finally get out of prison, that they can say, I did something that I can be proud of. I know with Fred, that has been a huge bonus for him, and it also helps him get a job. I mean, all these things add up. Like, so our sales go to back into Little Readers, so it goes back into the system, so to speak, and to benefit the children, of which there are so many in our state that are affected by an incarcerated parent. But also, when they get out, the artists have something that they can refer back to. We sadly don't have very many female artists here in the state of Georgia. That is something I wish we had more of, but we seem to not get very much response from the female artists, which is why you won't hear me talk very much about them, just because it doesn't happen. With my grandmother, it happened a lot, because as you see, all this sewing was done by women. And she had a great deal of ladies participate in her show. Okay, so I got this letter from Lewis Turner. He is, if you go to our art show, you will see several things done by him. He did the Prince, he did the Chadwick Boseman, he did the Tyler Perry, he did the little parrot, and he's one of the most talented young men that I've ever known. He's been in for about 20 years. He is an incredible person, and I've grown to really, really enjoy him. And so he wrote us this letter, and Elizabeth has this copy, but I'm going to read it to y'all because it also says everything. "Thank you so much for all your help. You have done so much for me, even though I don't deserve it, and I've asked for more than I could possibly ever repay. You and everyone at Heartbound give us, the incarcerated, hope. You build family relationships and you create opportunities. Your ministry has a multifaceted effect on the lives of people. It helps build broken relationships of parents and their children through Returning Hearts and Little Readers, which in my book is a very powerful ministry and truly honorable. Your ministry gives people in prison hope by allowing them to see there are people in this world who truly care for their well-being in spite of their past. You all even give artists a stage to show their work, and that same stage allows them to assist in your ministry. It allows us to be part of something that has an awesome impact on an innumerable amount of people. It is nice to be recognized for our talent and to receive monetary awards to boot. But the real satisfaction for me when I send artwork comes when I hear results of what your ministry does and knowing in my own small way I helped. Which brings me to a story I would like to share with you. I am a mentor here at Walker. And part of what I do as a mentor is be a sounding board for people when they have issues they want to talk about, stress they need to clear, or even when they just want to celebrate a win. Whatever their need, I'm here for them, regardless of what I may be feeling. So, there is one guy that just transferred here around 4 months ago. He has been worried about having a relationship with his son. Little man is what he calls him. As you can imagine, it is difficult being a parent while incarcerated, especially when a child is very young. It is important for a parent to help build a child's foundation and build a positive relationship with them. He has not seen his son in person for a very long time. Thank you, COVID. However, he was able to take part in Little Readers. Well, recently he called home and found out his son had received the recording of him reading to his son. He said with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face that his son had been watching it over and over that day. His excitement was out of this world. As he walked away, I thought about how Little Readers affected his life, his son, his family, and me. The reason I put myself into that list is because I know that in some way my artwork may have helped bring him and his son that happiness. I know that it takes so much more than what I've contributed, but even if it was only some many decimals, 1% of the total contribution, at least I know I helped a fraction. You gave me that opportunity to help, and I greatly appreciate that. And we have so many of our artists who are so grateful for their opportunity. And I told this story at the event here at Oglethorpe a few weeks ago, but my grandparents and my mother and her brothers were very kind to the people there. And a few years ago, right after I had started Art from the Inside, I got a messenger message on my computer from a man, and he said he had been a cook for my grandmother, which means he was incarcerated. And he wanted to know, how my mother, how, if I was related to them and how the Wiggins children were doing. And so they sent the phone number to me, and so I called him, and I talked to him. His name was Jesse Mack, and he was in his 90s, and he had been a teenager in Parchman. And he had cooked in my grandmother's kitchen, and he wanted to know how Marvin and Paul were. That was my uncle, and both my uncles, my mother's older brothers, and how Jane, and that's my mother. And he said, I cooked for them, and they were so nice to me. And I just want to know how they're doing. He's in his 90s, and this is 70-something years after he got out. And so I read a lot, about my grandparents, but that told me that it was true, that they were kind, and that they weren't, I'm sure that my grandfather was tough because you had to be to run a prison, but that they extended kindnesses. And so I called my mother and I said, do you remember this guy named Jesse Mack? She goes, yeah, I remember him. He had the biggest smile, and he was always smiling. When he got out, he walked to the bus to take you away from Parchman. And my mother said she remembered that she and her brother were driving down the road, and they stopped and offered to give him a ride to the bus station. And he said no, to the bus stop. And he said no, he would just keep on walking. But she remembered him, and he died a few weeks ago. And after I was here at Oglethorpe, I messaged his wife and told her, that my mother and I were really sorry to hear that her husband had died. And so we had a little email exchange for a while about it, and how sad she is. And he was, I think he was 94 when he died. And it was really a gift to me that he contacted us, because it validated a lot of what we do, and validated what my grandmother had done and how she had taught my mother and her brothers to really see people and to be kind to them no matter what their circumstances or their past. And I think you can tell this letter is written to Heart by Ministry. It's not written to me, it's just written to the ministry. From Lewis, tells you that nothing changes. Back then, a man was appreciated, that somebody saw him and somebody was kind to him. And right now, in 2021, a man is appreciative of being noticed for what he does and who he is, and for somebody being kind to him.